Hello everyone, here's another video on the channel. For those who haven't subscribed yet, please do so, leave a like if you enjoy the content, and feel free to comment below. Today's topic is the dangers of nostalgia and romanticism. One thing that not many people are able to grasp when it comes to acceptance is that the 20s, as in this current decade, it feels weird to say the 20s because we're used to talking about the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, always thinking about the 20th century. But now we have to switch gears to the 21st century. The 20s have begun, and they are and will be completely different, even from the 2010s, which people already saw as a complete degeneration of society. We used to think that things were already starting to get bad around 2000, but compared to today, we were living in paradise back then. Back then, in the 2000s and the 90s, especially when it comes to relationships. So a lot of people will say it was already bad, the men just woke up now, and so on, but that doesn't make it any less true. But with complex issues like this, it's always good to analyze things. Like I've said here 4 or 5 times on the channel, these things are usually like pie charts, well distributed. The causes of this, it's not just one thing, you know? It's not just that men woke up. No, things really have gotten worse. Yeah, right. There are a bunch of misandrous laws, then smartphones, social media, especially Instagram, which I've already explained this. Orchid, Facebook, then Instagram made things worse, and Instagram really is the big agent of this new era, right? It's the one that permanently and irreversibly damages the female brain. So, accepting that things have changed and changed for the worse, and that the chances of having a happy relationship today, right? A relationship, a marriage, the chances are really, really, really low, honestly, right? So, I see a lot of guys who really don't want to date, you know? Guys who are red pilled, who really get it, they're happy being single, okay? Truly happy, not just saying it. It's not that fake happiness, it's real. These guys are really focused on their own lives. There are a lot of guys like that in Brazil, okay? There really are a lot of guys like that. The male awakening in Brazil is huge, okay? And even though there are still a lot of simps, and simps are still a majority, they're becoming lower and lower value, right? So, but a lot of these guys are already red pilled. They still have a lot of those nostalgic, romantic thoughts like, wow, things used to be so much better. Like when you'd go out for ice cream with his girlfriend, he'd take a trip, enjoy the scenery, keep posting stories on Instagram all the time, go to the movies. There wasn't all this showing off back then. Remembering those times and talking about it with your friends is actually healthy. A human anthropology, one of the keys to socialization is exactly about remembering the great achievements of the past, whether through collective or individual memory. So, remembering this kind of thing from time to time doesn't hurt. In fact, it's actually good for you. It's just like talking about old soccer games you watched, old movies, old stories, old books. Old human experiences are interesting too. The real problem is when you try to emulate or recreate a reality that doesn't exist anymore. When it comes to today's world, I always use Netflix as an example. There's no point in trying to open a DVD or Blu-ray rental store now. You'll go out of business. There's just no way to compete with streaming services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney, HBO, So it's pointless. As cool as it was to rent 2 or 3 DVDs on a Friday and return them on Monday, or rent Super Nintendo tapes and all that, the world has changed. And even if things have changed for the worse when it comes to relationships, right? Yeah, no, that doesn't mean you have to become a nihilist and think, well, okay, even if I don't miss it. And about relationships and all that, but man, wanting to live in the past and all that, it's just not worth it, okay? There's no point in thinking that way. It's like when you keep thinking that soccer, for those who like soccer, it was better in the past, man. You'll never watch your team play again and all that? That's not the best way to look at things, okay? I'm saying this from personal experience because nostalgia has really messed up my life before, okay? And I bet it's the same for a lot of people. So there's no point in trying to be I'm not even going to say white knight, okay? I'm not even going to be sarcastic this time because there really were a lot of relationships back in the 2000s, even the early 2010s, that were still working, just like that. Like I said in the video about the few relationships that actually work, a lot of those relationships were destroyed by modern times. Then, from 2017 and 2018 onward, that's when this virtual solipsism really intensified, right? That's something Attitude Alpha always talks about a lot, right? Trying to emulate Instagram's market value in real life. Women do this all the time. That's why the math doesn't add up, and more women end up single? So, one of the main dangers of romanticism and nostalgia is trying to live in an era that doesn't exist anymore, right? It's incompatible, right? Accepting that incompatibility is actually a good thing, okay? Because then you protect yourself from possible anachronisms that might happen in your life. You'll already be prepared, you'll already be more tuned in to what's going on. So, guys, don't get stuck on this idea of I'm going to try to do. I'm not saying you should never date or anything like that. I've already said this. There's a small percentage and all that, things that can happen. I don't give love advice for people's lives or anything like that. Here, I'm speaking in a general way, because that's what's going to be the rule for most people. If you're lucky enough to win the love lottery and have a happy relationship, that's great. Good luck, because I wish you all the best. But the rule, guys, is that things aren't going back to the way they used to be, okay? So be very careful with. Sometimes you rewatch a movie from 2004, 2005, right? And you see how relationships were back then, or maybe a TV show from the 90s, right? Running into that girl from high school 10 years later and all that, and thinking you can relive that childhood love, etc. Real life is a lot harsher than those Netflix stories, so be very careful with that, because the environment has changed drastically in the last 5, 7 years. Drastically, really. Normal girls in their minds today, they see themselves as minor celebrities, influencers. They really think they have an absurd level of importance to society. And some guys also fall into this virtual subspecies thing. But with men, like I said, it's more about money, coaching, and politics. That's why there's so many guys out there wanting to talk about everything on every subject on Instagram and Twitter and so on, right? But women aren't like that. For women, it's more about relationships, spirituality, meditation, self love, and so on. In both cases, whether it's men or women, 99% of what they say is bullshit, okay? Because these are higher level topics, but the people who really study this stuff, they're not going to be making little stories on Instagram, okay? Except for one or two exceptions, and here we don't deal with supreme exceptions, right? We have to talk about the rule here. Generalization is necessary if you want to have a YouTube channel, otherwise you can't explain anything, right? Especially when it comes to this topic of stimuli and rewards in the environment. I have a lot of red-pilled single friends. They say if a girl shows up, like the ones from the 1990s or 2000s, they say themselves that it's hard for that to happen. But if it did, they totally date her and all that. But working with that kind of certainty, chasing that carrot on a stick, thinking she might show up, can just lead to frustration. And the problem isn't even you, it's the illusion itself. The problem is, when you try to make that real, if a girl shows up who has nothing to do with it, not even the unicorn you're dreaming about, for those who believe in unicorns, right? And then you try to be the old school guy with a modern woman? That's what a lot of people talk about. There are guys out there trying to be conservative, chivalrous, or even just a regular guy. There are guys trying to be just a normal guy in a modern relationship. You can't be a normal guy in a modern relationship because modern relationships are built, they're already abnormal in themselves. The exposure on Instagram, how fast everything happens, the lack of real friendship and relationships, people's stupidity, usually with the average Brazilian IQ, it's dropping dramatically? People are really getting dumber here in Brazil, seriously. So, like, everything is messed up. The relationship is already wrong from the start. So, it's already a false premise, this modern relationship. So there's no way for you to even be a normal guy. You don't even have to be a cuck, a simp, nothing. Just a regular guy, who treats a woman the way she should be treated, without idolizing her, putting her on a pedestal, or anything like that. Even then, it's not gonna work out, man. So this video might seem a bit black-pilled, nihilistic, and all that, but it's not, right? Actually, it's not. The subliminal message behind all this, which is now coming to the surface, so it's not even subliminal anymore, is that he doesn't need a relationship to be happy, right? He doesn't need a girlfriend or a marriage. Man, just look at I've already said it. Are there still happy relationships nowadays in modern times? There are, but it's the exception. Most of the guys you know today who are married or dating aren't satisfied. They're not broke because they spend everything on their woman, right? Don't guys always complain, saying marriage is bad, making marriage jokes and all that? So yeah, stop focusing on the exceptions even though they exist. Yes, they do exist. I know that. Everyone here knows at least one or two couples. Actually, I even know more than average couples who are happy. But the number of unhappy couples I know, I could count them on like 50 hands. That's how many unhappy couples I know. So if you're trying to find some exception for your life, try making money, man. Try getting in shape. Try reading a ton of books. Those things actually change your life. Hiccup, you like watching movies, not really into reading? Grab a list, like 1,000 movies to watch before you die. You'll see the best films ever made. Do anything. Play video games, go fishing, whatever. But don't get stuck on times that aren't coming back. We talk a lot about boomers and all that, how they messed up our economy, etc., etc. But honestly, they really did mess things up, right? They handed over a broken Brazil to the people born from 1980 onward, right? Because, like I said before, the people with money in Brazil are old, pot bellied, and have white hair. Those are the guys born between 46 and 64. The real money, the real capital, in that more Marxist sense of the word, is all in the hands of those guys. And sure, there are a few exceptions here and there, but the rule is that the money is in the hands of those guys. That's it. But they do have one quality. They adapted well to the rural exodus in Brazil. They didn't stay put. When they moved to the city, they were a generation that usually spent their childhood on a small farm or ranch, and their parents, who were generally born between the 1910s and 1930s in Brazil, the pre-boomer generation, which I actually consider a golden generation, definitely not the boomers, not at all. But that generation, born between 1910 and 1930 in Brazil, was a golden generation. But that's a topic for another video. So those people really did spend most of their lives in rural Brazil. But the boomers, they usually only spent their childhood, just a little bit of their childhood, some even their teenage years, in rural areas, and then they moved to the city. And they ventured out across Brazil and all that. Obviously, they had a million advantages that our generation from the 80s onward will never have. The Brazilian government gave subsidies to black people in Mato Grosso to settle the land and so on. Brazil was growing at 10% a year, interest rates were low, and the pension system hadn't gone bankrupt yet, and all that. Anyway, they were lucky. It's not their fault they were born in a good era and grew up in Brazil. But these guys didn't sit around complaining like, oh, life on the farm, I don't want to go. No, they went to the city, they went to other places. They even went to rural areas in other states where they didn't know anything about the culture and they made money. So from that perspective, even though I'm a harsh critic of the boomer generation, that's something admirable, what they did, right? So don't be that person who keeps lamenting the past and all that. Just use the past for the occasional bar conversation at a barbecue. Those moments when you remember things, when you see your old friends. I'm not saying never do it. Actually, I'm not telling you what to do. You can do whatever you want. I'm just giving some general advice because too much nostalgia isn't good for you. So be really careful with that. And to wrap up the video, modern relationships aren't gonna be like they were in 2009. That little thrill you got from a text message is never coming back. You're gonna have to keep watching your girlfriend's stories all the time and photos and all that stuff and boomerangs. Constant exposure, right? And if you're lucky enough to have an exceptional relationship, congratulations, okay? But always focus on personal growth, alright? That's today's message about nostalgia and the dangers of romanticizing the past, which isn't coming back. A big hug to everyone.